Good afternoon. Welcome to Preservation Connecticut Spring 2024 series, Talking About Preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm delighted to be your host. Today we are chatting about helping historic churches with Modern Ruins architects Walter Sidovic, FAIA, and Jill Gotthelf. And joining them will be Mike Farino, Director of Field Services and Circuit Rider at Preservation Connecticut. I'd like to begin the program by sharing with you information about Preservation Connecticut. Preservation Connecticut is the statewide, private, nonprofit historic preservation organization founded in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut's communities. We are statutory partners with the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm proud to say that for 49 years, we have successfully championed the protection of remarkable community assets all over the state by leveraging funding, advocating, forming partnerships, and promoting stewardship. Our office is located in the Eli Whitney Boarding House on Whitney Avenue in Hamden. Listed on the National Register of Historic Places, it's the only surviving residential structure of the industrial village that centered on Eli Whitney's armory, and it has served as Preservation Connecticut's headquarters since 1989. We have a staff of 9 preservation professionals and a board of 19 preservationists from around the state. Staff listed here are always available to assist with inquiries. Christopher Wiegren, our Deputy Director, contact Chris for information on historic preservation easements, our bi-monthly magazine, Connecticut Preservation News, our Olmsted in Connecticut Landscape Survey, or to arrange a book talk for his book, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places. Renee Trubert, Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. Please contact Renee for information on redevelopment of historic industrial sites and tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our Development and Special Projects Manager. Jordan manages projects related to development and preservation activities. She curates social media and email outreach, receives and monitors demolition notices from municipalities, prepares historic tax credit applications, and nominations to the State and National Register of Historic Places. Kristen Hopewood is our Membership and Outreach Manager. She manages all of the inquiries that come through our website, provides member services, arranges special events, and is the editor of our Historic Properties Exchange, a free listing of threatened historic properties. And finally, our team of circuit riders, Mike Farino, Brad Scheid, Stacy Varro, and Stefan Danchuk. They provide immediate boots-on-the-ground service to homeowners, developers, municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations and museums, historic district commissions, and more, with an array of preservation technical assistance, including community organizing, prioritizing maintenance and repairs, historic designations, funding, and archaeology. These chats have become an important and enjoyable tool for us to meet our mission. We're able to connect with the public and hear what's on your mind. Please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions directly at the end of the presentation, or contact us afterwards for a call or a site visit. And just a little preview of what we'll be talking about next week, Connecticut's industrial development during the Progressive Era. So I hope you'll join us for that chat as well. And now I'm going to stop sharing my slide. We have a moment to see who's in the room. Welcome, everyone. We've got a great crowd today. So nice that all of you have joined us. And I'm going to turn the program over to Walter. Welcome, Walter.
Thank you, Jane. We're honored to be here, and happy May Day to everyone. I'm going to open up our presentation on helping churches, which is it's a collective presentation among 2 of my favorite people, Mike Fiorino, Dr. Fiorino from Preservation, Connecticut, and my esteemed partner, Jill Gotthelf from our firm, Modern Ruins. This is a subject very close to our hearts and at the core of Modern Ruins' mission now for virtually 4 decades, helping historic churches, and by that, expanding it to all religious sites and entities. In fact, to that point, we're going to begin with a demonstration that heritage is like everything on a spectrum. It's not just about colonial era buildings clearly anymore. We've reached deep into mid-century modernism, and these are buildings that touch many of us because they were built within our own lifetimes. They have extraordinary attributes, although the context of them is quite different than the kinds of traditional buildings that we've worked with in the past. The 1960 example of Mishkan, Israel, which is located in Hamden, is going to be counterposed with a building built about 90 years earlier in Bridgeport, St. Luke's, now St. Luke St. Paul's Episcopal Church, originated as St. Paul's Church. 2 quite different structures, but very similar opportunities that each presents. I love looking at these in the context of their siting. Mishkan, Israel has extraordinary attributes. It actually began in New Haven. It's the oldest congregation in Connecticut, founded in 1840. This is its current home. It's its 3rd home, which was built in 1960. And you can see that it's situated on a quite large site adjacent to nearby ball fields and a golf course, but mixed within a scattered subdivision development with flowing roads and houses bumped one another, but an isolated situation. By contrast, St. Luke St. Paul's was a beneficiary of Park City, of creating a beautiful city filled with parks through the largesse of P.T. Barnum and other prominent early urban settlers in Bridgeport. St. Luke St. Paul's is on the right block, adjacent to Washington Park. It's a gorgeous park, a great centerpiece for the community, surrounded by religious sites. There are numerous of them facing the park and about a block away. Quite a different context because St. Luke St. Paul's is integrated fully into the community. It becomes one of the residential buildings that it flanks. Mishkan, Israel, clearly, well, you can see from the images that there's quite a distinction, the horizontality versus the verticality, and there's purpose in that. The horizontality allowed for a number of functions to be able to occur within the congregation, and those were a reflection of the baby boomer era that this and similar buildings were responding to. We had different building technologies. We had a thinner skin. We had longer spans. We had lots of windows, especially ribbon windows. We had vast integration. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the featured speakers at the building's inauguration, which I think is extraordinary. It's multi-purpose by design. It has some extraordinary technological innovations. It is built around mechanization, which earlier buildings were not. They're more based on passive systems that buffer the natural environment. Here, Mishkan Israel has the facility to couple with its natural surroundings through engineering innovations. It's very, very open to the environment, as you'll see in a moment. It has lots of parking because people would drive to it more than walk. And as I'd mentioned, a very transparent type of building. St. Luke, St. Paul's, by contrast, is vertical. The verticality of these, Jill and I referred to as houses of the horizon, are communication devices. Churches generally were the tallest buildings in town for the longest periods of time, up until the early 20th century, and for good reason. They were communications devices, they were centering devices. St. Paul's, originally in 1868, was a post-Civil War 13th Amendment Reconstruction era building. So its adaptation to the neighborhood and the community was quite different than the one that's reflected in the architectural context of, for instance, a mid-century modern building. It was purpose-built for worship. It's completely walkable, and it's built of traditional materials. So I want to talk about some of the inherent assets and issues. For both of these sites, WSA Modern Ruins is engaged in developing condition evaluation and planning for a hierarchy of projects to take place to enhance not only the physical fabric of the buildings, but also their usefulness and capabilities going forward for the congregation and for the community. This entrance, actually the original entrance on Ridge Road, is not used because at the time the building was built, the permitting wasn't fully allowed for the drop-off that was required on the road. But this is the engagement of the building with the population. It's open, it's beautiful, it's landscape. You walk into the rotunda, it's filled with art. The congregation has been very forward-thinking in terms of pulling out both their new and older artworks and documents, displaying those around the synagogue. The sanctuary itself has gorgeous art glass in the location of the Torah at the forward end of the sanctuary. The sanctuary is actually split into 3 individualized elements that are separated by really innovative and beautiful guillotine walls. So the sanctuary can become smaller or very much grandly larger, depending on the purpose and need. In the upper right-hand corner, I like to show that because there's some magical acoustical treatment that's done within the sanctuary. You can see in the curvature of the panels on the ceiling. And if you look to the far right, you begin to get a glimpse of the east wall, which is completely open to the east lawns, shown in the next image where the dancing is taking place. It has a very intimate and beautiful, very poetic chapel, an enormous kitchen, a commercial kitchen, an equally enormous roofscape, educational wing, and grounds that are a perfect setting for environmental initiatives, especially those relating to green building initiatives and clean renewable energy, which the congregation is very interested in developing. By contrast, St. Luke, St. Paul's hasn't changed much. Here it is in its original form, very much like its early form. But wait, it burned in 1931, which wouldn't be immediately recognizable. This is an important element in this building's history, because even though it looks mid-19th century, it's early 20th century in terms of its reconstruction. This is a 1931 sanctuary, quite beautiful, but the technologies incorporated into the rebuild are quite different than the original technologies embedded in the first iteration of the church and the tower, and that has created some problems. It does have a wonderful undercroft that was able to be incorporated through the new building, and it has also quite a large kitchen because both St. Luke, St. Paul's, and Congregation Mishkan Israel have food service and food provision for needy as a core mission of their identity and contribution to the communities. The sanctuary also has this: buckets and trash cans that are collecting water in a variety of locations because the roof has become so permeable. And this has led to a great number of problems around the site. When we look at water coming through buildings, naturally it's coming from the top down, but we work, Jill and I, in terms of our evaluation, from the bottom up, because that's often the most telling. The water coming from the sky onto the roof needs to meet the ground and have a place to go. Otherwise, it wreaks havoc with the lower components of churches, undercrofts, and foundations. In this case, it's no different than most. The water migration into the lower areas has created a condition where what were originally ventilation and view shed windows in those window wells are now completely boxed in, which cuts the undercroft off, not only in terms of daylighting and access visually to the exterior, but also in terms of ventilation and general guidelines for the healthiness of the building, which permeates the rest of the sanctuary and the attic spaces. You can see the water has no place to go in the center image that's adjacent to the foundation, and that there simply are simple but often overlooked errant issues like broken gutters or disconnects that are causing water to end up in places it was never intended to go. When you're at the ground, you start to see things that are keys to where to begin to look for problems higher up. In this case, shards of the shingles flying off of the building along the principal walkway into the church and the church offices. Clearly a dangerous condition, one that everyone is aware of, one that we're seeking to ameliorate both temporarily and certainly permanently. With the help of Stefan Danchik from Preservation Connecticut and his very facile maneuvering of drones, we love to incorporate technological innovations in our investigations with hands-on. We're able to do a flyover and get a closer look at what's happening with this 1931 addition to the 1868 building. In the 1920s and the 1930s, Pennsylvania heavily marketed its slate to compete with New York, Vermont slate that was the benchmark for S1 quality building material. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania's slate by and large was not S1, but rather S2 or S3 quality, not suitable for roofs. And you can see here not only the uniform color, which was different than the original blend used on the church, but it's filled with iron ferrites that rust and create delamination within the slate. It's very pronounced. It's a well-known condition. Unfortunately, it requires that the entire roof be resurfaced, at least for the slate portion, not the underlying portion, because it's an endemic issue that can't be corrected. It's a flaw in that type of slate. Further, though, there has clearly been deferred maintenance on aspects of the tower that may have been difficult to get to over time. It has been modified and rebuilt at least once since after the fire, so probably in the 1950s, thereabouts. And some of the detailing is inconsistent with the original detailing of the tower and the tower roof. And you can see that the windows, which were an important contributor to letting airflow and moisture flow through the tower, get closed off. That traps moisture inside the building and creates a condition where fasteners begin to rust, which is exactly what we're seeing here. These slates are dislodging because the nails holding them in place were, number one, ferrous, not cuprous. They were made out of a form of iron or steel, not out of copper. And so they rust. But the tracing of that issue can be brought back to locking in moisture and not letting it escape out of the building in a natural way that was prescribed in its original detailing. So again, this is a problem that has a core issue that needs to be treated before this building is going to be able to function optimally. To get up into the tower to investigate that, we knew that we were going to be joined by a number of pigeons and other inhabitants that had been up there for decades. So we wrap ourselves up in hazmat suits. That's yours truly, and we've all worn these. It's safe for us to go into the towers. We've done them enough, but we certainly gear up. And once up there, we find extraordinary resources that we would not have discovered otherwise. This building has what's referred to as a chime of 8 individual bells, all tuned to a full octave. Each one represents a single note, plus the pealing bell. And you can imagine that with a full octave, a musician can play any song with that chime, much like a carillon, and be able to peal. That's the communication device that's facing Washington Park. These bells have been out of operation for some long time, but it's our deeply held wish that we can re-engage the bells to be able to peal and to play into the park, which is a lovely atmospheric for the neighborhood and a form of engagement that we so often lack in our communities now that once were an integral part. Sustainable stewardship really combines 3 fundamental elements. We're going to talk about each of those, but those include building fabric, understanding what your building does, what it wants to do, how it's built; programming, understand what your building is capable of doing, and community needs, and bringing all that together as one. And from programming to fundraising, because a smart program built around a healthy building offers multiple opportunities for fundraising that are far beyond the traditional types of funding that we once considered as the foothold for most of preservation work. So we're going to talk about each of these briefly, but I want to focus first on building fabric. We're doing a condition assessment. We do zillions of condition assessments for buildings, and that is to say, we knit together all of the issues related to the history of the building technologies, the use patterns, the degradation over time, the application of modern codes, a variety of elements that are related to the environmental conditions surrounding the buildings and the operations or the options for restoration or renewal. That's all part and parcel of a condition assessment and establishing a hierarchy of required projects to be addressed over an extended period of time, some immediate, as we saw the slates falling off of the tower, and some up to 20 years into the future projected, so that each congregation can get a reasonable handle on the costs and the steps that need to be taken so that there's never an undoing of a project that you've completed to be able to complete the next one. It's very progressive. This is a general statement that is universally true, that heritage buildings are stellar performers, even in the face, and perhaps especially in the face, of modern codes. Why? Because they did not rely, up until mid-century, they did not rely on technological innovation. They relied on systems that had evolved over millennia, really, and they're adapted to the environment. So these buildings are awesome performers, and then we can enhance that performance once we allow them to do what they were intended to do. That's really the objective, is to get to the point of origin or genesis of the building, let it express itself, it'll be happy again, and then enhance it. I'm going to say this, I'm not meant to be disparaging or offending in any way, but there is a difference between what architects do and what contractors do. It is often the case that people turn to contractors for advice on what to do with their buildings. For heritage buildings, that's perhaps not the optimal way to turn, because we need to understand what the differences are in the involvement of each of those. Architects reveal pathologies. Architects, as I mentioned, pull together a variety of elements that are affecting the building and those that will affect its future performance. Architects define a scope of work. Contractors fulfill that scope of work, whether it's masonry, whether it's roofing, whether it's engineering installations related to mechanical systems. That's what contractors do. But contractors' part in all of this is to hone their skills in a specific trade. Architects look at a world of issues and pull them together to try to make sense out of what's happening. So I say that at the outset that it's an important distinction to make, and people often get them confused. Buildings and people act alike. They both need moisture, and this is true for all buildings. Do not, please, try to exclude moisture by sealing one's building from the environment. There are plenty of things on the market, promoted as such. It's a terrible idea. Just the same as it is to put a plastic bag over our bodies in lieu of clothing. We need to engage with the environment, and especially so with moisture, but we need to be able to manage water. And we need to be able to manage transpiration of moisture through and around the building so that it can do it in a healthy manner. Don't overreact. Buildings, especially heritage buildings, tend to fall apart in very dramatic ways, almost calling for attention. But once hands are on them and the right approach is taken, they respond beautifully, go back into place and back into service, hardly bearing a scar. So it's important to know that just because something's deteriorating doesn't mean that it needs to be thrown out and replaced. Far from it. When people say maintenance free, that is a lie, period. Heritage is resilient by nature because, as I'd mentioned earlier, we didn't have the benefits of technological adaptation where we can literally engineer nature out of our buildings. Heritage had to work with nature in the specific environment in which it was put into service. So it's resilient, and it remains that way. Much of the restoration work that we get involved in is really more revelatory than it is restoration. It's a revelation to see how well your building can perform when it's allowed to do so. And it's one of our greatest joys. And finally, in terms of building fabric, please understand that it is cheaper to do things right than to do them twice or three times. That's an actual truism. In terms of programming, we build from our understanding of the building fabric. And the first point of programming really is strategic community engagement, to understand where our place is within the community, to know thyself, to understand what we ourselves want to become, to establish symbiotic relationships. Every congregation doesn't have to provide every service to every neighborhood entity. We can share those services and allow one congregation with better inherent resources for something to take on that role while they lead people to your congregation to take on a different role. That's a great way of building community, and it's a great way to optimize the value and the benefits that are inherent in your particular site. Lean into the existing strengths of your building. It's not necessary to try to reinvent the wheel. It's what's really required is to understand where your building strengths lie. Adapting to climate change is the number one thing that we face. None of our buildings could have foreseen the kinds of climate events that we're now facing. And water management is certainly at the top of that list, as are high winds, lots of sun, lots of heat, etc. But we can adapt. And as I'd mentioned, heritage buildings tend to be very resilient. We need to look at these things incrementally. They need to be science-driven. Our congregational buildings, our religious buildings, tended to be by design quite perfect for the performing arts, for spoken word, for comfort, for view shed. So we can play into that. Likewise, they were the center of much education historically. There's still great venues for educational outreach and development. There are environmental initiatives where we can establish new paradigms for how to adapt our heritage buildings to new codes and to the new environmental imperatives that we're facing. Likewise, innovations in access and parking, simple things like jitneys to move people around, ADA accessibility that allows people to move in and out of spaces with greater facility, and taking advantage of technological innovations in both mobility and in transportation. And of course, all of these sites have the facility to become special events venues because they're so strategically placed within communities. They're so abundant in light and space. They're so familiar to us. They're anchors in the communities. So they're perfect for special events of a variety of types. And finally, fundraising, again, beginning with strategic community engagement. It's different, but if we're looking for funding, we should look again towards symbiotic relationships to make the best use of going after funds where they have the greatest impact within a community. Looking at trends in congregational growth, that's a very solid and traditional way of increasing funds is to grow your congregation. We know that we've been losing congregations over the last couple of decades or more, but we also know that there are trends that have begun showing up about a decade or so ago. Millennials tend to love, at least when they're canvassed, the traditional aspect of the buildings that house our community religious endeavors. They like the sense of permanence. Millennials also are beginning to find, as we all are, that social media is not as fulfilling as social interaction. And so there are trends toward more face-to-face community engagement. We have, again, shared resources that we've been starting to do about 20 years ago. Most congregations began not being able to afford a full-time sexton, but you could afford a share of a sexton. And so what we've been seeking to do is to arrange for a sexton who could have a full-time job by splitting his or her efforts among 4, 5, or 6 congregations in proximity. Since the work is fairly similar, it's possible to have a sexton for a day a week and to share those kinds of resources. Conventional funding is becoming far more difficult to find. There's still vast programs like Save America's Treasures, but not nearly those that were abundant during the bicentennial, 1976 and following. However, we do have America 250, the semi-quincentennial, half of 500, which is coming up in just 2 years. Even though it's been a little bit under the radar, expect that there may be some extraordinary funding sources for our heritage properties and community engagement through America 250. There's also opportunity to be innovative in fundraising through establishing preservation training programs, which helps our buildings, helps train all kinds of people, young people who want to go through vocational training, people who have across the board, young and old, who have special skill set in working with their hands and love materials. There are environmental initiatives in abundance. We face so many that any project that leans into helping to solve environmental quandaries is very welcome, and there's funding for that coming through a variety of bills that are making their way through Congress and communities and other institutional funding sources. It's important to strengthen local economies so that, again, that's a symbiotic relationship. When we're buying materials and looking for people to do the work, that we first look locally, that we buy locally, that we buy materials that are from the place, which matches what the original mindset might have been. Again, programs are rich in terms of special events across a variety of heritage religious sites, and those are important attributes for political fundraising or for fundraising. And finally, building political capital. We often shy away from getting deeply engaged in politics, but we need to, because there's a strength that goes in both directions in terms of the support that we get and the strengthening of our own communities by getting involved in politics, having a voice, and sharing our needs and desires through that platform. At this point, I'd love to hand off our program to our esteemed colleague, Mike Forino. Dr. Forino, I'm going to back out and let you to it.
Thank you, Walter. I'm going to try to share my screen. Is that working? Okay, how's that? Is that good, Jane?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, Walter. That's a tough act to follow. You have so much knowledge. I've been very fortunate to be working with Walter and Jill on the St. Luke's project. And I will talk to you a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but I'll talk generally about what Preservation Connecticut does with churches in mind. And I'll try to be quick so we have time for questions. I'm sure there are a few. So as you know, Connecticut's home to thousands of churches and religious sites. And when I say religious sites, we are talking about the more traditional buildings, many of which were built in the post-Civil War era. But we're also talking about, of course, synagogues, mosques, temples, ruins, and even cultural landscapes that hold cultural and social significance for many groups of people. But of course, as we know, in the last half century in particular, the role of religion has changed in our society, and many congregations have closed or consolidated. And for those that do remain in historic buildings, or in many cases, newer congregations, immigrant populations, or in some cases, growing congregations that purchase historic buildings, the challenge of restoring or maintaining large historic churches often seems to be a monumental task. But I think a point Walter was trying to make, and I think he made it well, and I'll stress again, is that these are they can be very large projects, but there are ways of parsing out projects, of making them easier, making them more efficient. One of the ways of making them more efficient is what Walter said, his suggestion of having an architect really go through your building and understand it before work commences. And I can attest to that. There's many projects that we work on or have seen, I should say, that would have benefited from an architect's eye. Often projects have to be redone, or they're done out of order, and usually congregations are best suited by talking to someone like Walter at the beginning. So I'd just like to briefly, there are many important reasons why we as Preservation Connecticut, and I'm assuming most of you are preservationists as well, want to save historic churches. The first and most apparent reason, of course, is their artistic and cultural value. They are themselves pieces of art, and they contain works of art, woodwork, stained glass, stonework, things of that nature. But I don't need to tell everyone that here. But I really want to focus on what their importance is beyond preservation, that they're significant for the vital role they play within their respective communities. And I think this is particularly important, and this is what we're finding in urban areas that have been subjected to systematic disinvestment, say over the past 70, 80 years or so. The congregations in these areas are really do, in most cases, serve our most vulnerable populations, including school children, the homeless, elderly, the mentally ill, and those struggling with addiction issues. And the potential for the closure of these urban churches really gives us pause and concern about the fate of the buildings, of course, but the respective communities that they serve as well. So to address these challenges faced by many religious organizations, our organization has implemented a variety of initiatives. Our circuit rider, which is our field staff, as Jane explained in the beginning, regularly visits dozens of churches annually. We offer a number of types of guidance and support. We offer assistance in the form of a program we call our Technical Assistance Consultancy. This is aimed to provide immediate assistance for organizations that have safety concerns regarding their buildings, who need second opinions and temporary recommendations, or who need to answer specific questions for funders. So if anyone out there has an emergency issue, please reach out to us and let us know. We also help applicants in navigating funding resources, some of which Walter talked about, but ones that are more specific to Connecticut, like those through the State Historic Preservation Office. They offer matching grants both for planning money to do things like a condition assessment, but they also match or they have matching funds for capital projects. Right now, that amount is up to $200,000 in matching funds. And we also work with applicants who are applying for money for Partners for Sacred Places grants, the National Park Service, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. But our own contribution to this in terms of funding, in 2015, Preservation Connecticut established a program specifically for religious organizations. It's called our Maintenance and Repair Grant Program. It's a $15,000 matching grant. It's offered once a year. But since 2015, we've leveraged some $650,000 to fund about $1.5 million worth of capital projects throughout the state. And these are some examples you can see on the map over the past several years. And I just want to, so those are the more traditional forms of funding that we deal with on a daily basis, but more and more resources are limited and competition for grant funds are greater. So there is a need to look for more creative sources of funding. So in that regard, I'd like to highlight Preservation Connecticut's work around Washington Park, where St. Luke's and St. Paul's is. This neighborhood, you can see a drone shot of some of it here. The park's on the left. It's really a rich cultural and social and architectural area. There's 266 Victoria era buildings in this neighborhood. They're all built between 1850 and 1890 based on a city plan that was developed by P.T. Barnum and William Noble. But as beautiful as this neighborhood is, and as intact of a Victorian neighborhood it is, its residents have to deal with some significant challenges. Among them, homelessness and addiction are pervasive issues. The area grapples with extremely high poverty rates, 33%, significantly higher than our state's average, and it's among the lowest or highest in Bridgeport, I should say. Low income households are 62% of the total, and 74% of children in the area live in low income families, 41% in impoverished households. There's likewise issues for seniors, and home ownership in the area is very small, only at 21%. Other issues include retail locations. There's no stores within walking distance. You needed to own a car in order to get to a grocery store. All this means that a lot of the residents of this area rely on the group of churches around the park. And these include the Calvary Temple Christian Center, which is in the former historic Park Congregational Church. That's at your top left. In the center is a Ukrainian church. That's a former Methodist. There is the Iglesia Baptiste Church. That's the top right, in a former Polish church. And of course, down on the right is St. Luke's. And on the left is the Apostolic Worship Center. In the interest of time, I will say that all of these churches have vital services. They provide clothing, food, financial assistance for people in need. The Ukrainian church offers low rent for Ukrainian refugees. The Spanish church offers a daycare facility for young women that want to go back to school. And as Walter pointed out, especially St. Luke's has a very large food pantry program. They offer, or they provide, I should say, groceries to about 300 families a month. But all those buckets that Walter pointed out, all that water goes right into the basement where that kitchen is. And every time it rains, essentially they have to shut down that food service. And actually now it is shut down indefinitely until some work to that kitchen is done. So where does Preservation Connecticut come in all this? Well, about 2 years ago, we identified a lot of these issues, and we realized, of course, that they're all in close proximity to one another. So we did something that we've never done before. We pooled resources of churches together, and we partnered with these 5 churches to apply for state money through Governor Lamont's Community Investment Fund to do both restoration work, more traditional preservation work, but also to do things like expand their kitchens, to expand their food capabilities, but also to most of these buildings, actually I should say all except the church in the top right, do not have handicap accessibility, which is a problem for, of course, parishioners, but also the people that benefit from food services or other ministries that the churches provide. So our project also includes accessibility and climate control and things of that nature. We applied for that grant several times, but you will hear more news about this in the coming months. But we're happy to announce that the Community Investment Board has preliminarily awarded Preservation Connecticut about a little over $5 million to do capital repairs to these churches around Washington Park, and also to do all the architectural and engineering work that's required to do that. And I will also say that these are the locations. You can see them in proximity of the park. But I will say that it's I think a timely project. There are other proposed projects in the region or in the immediate area. The YMCA actually operates quite a few houses, has supportive housing around the park. Those were renovated about 20 years ago, but they're slated to be renovated again. There is a proposed train station not that far from the park, which would really help the residents here. And there's also 2 proposed regional job campuses within walking distance of the park. And another component there's several educational components of the project, but one that I'll point out is Preservation Connecticut is hoping to list this area in the light blue above the park on the State Register of Historic Places, so that all the folks in that neighborhood could take advantage of Connecticut's Historic Homes Tax Credit Program. So really this has turned, we generally work with individual churches and individual projects, and we've really tried to think about this project as a area-wide, community-driven preservation project. And I would say it's not it's not only a preservation project. Preservation is really the tool to a greater end here of hopefully community revitalization. And I think with that, I'll turn it back to Jane so we can take some questions.
Do you want to take your screen down, Mike? Then we can see everybody. There we go. So thank you, Walter and Mike. Great presentations. I'd like to open it up to the floor if anybody would like to ask a question.
I would. I'm sorry, my name isn't appearing here, but my name is Ann Albritton. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ann, go ahead.
Okay, great. I am a local resident in New Preston, Connecticut, which is a village that is part of Washington, Connecticut. It's in Northwest Connecticut. I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with it. And a few civic-minded residents have gotten together to try and help with preserving a church from the 1882. It's a congregational church with a beautiful steeple. It was, and it still is, the biggest building in a little hamlet of maybe 900 people. So it's small. I would say Washington itself, I'm not positive, but Greater Washington, maybe 3,000 total residents. And so it's a very small congregation, elderly, and dwindling, unfortunately. And they do have very little resources. So we're in the initial stages. And I was listening to Walter, they were able to have an engineer from that another church in the area had used, who came out, and then they said that they need the help of enlisting an architect. So we're very much at the point where we need somebody to come out and give us, direction. There is a ceiling that is a large plaster ceiling that is falling in. They were told they couldn't play the organ because it could take down the ceiling. It's kind of that state. But it's not attracting water, as far as I can tell. I think it's just an age issue. The steeple, it's a totally, it's a wood building. Steeple has had buzzards in it, but it can be seen from, great distances. So it was very much a centerpiece and built to be a centerpiece for the town. So I attended this meeting in hoping to understand what I could do to give them access and enlist some resources and understand what kind of funding we might need to do so.
That's a great question, Ann. I'll let you take it, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. That's great. So we do often help, obviously my example was Bridgeport and urban churches, but we often provide assistance for rural churches as well, both through technical assistance through our circuit rider program, but also through our grant programs as well. Generally, the first recommendation we always have is to have one of our circuit riders come out, meet with the building committee, take a look around, and talk about potential funding sources. It does sound like you need a full condition assessment. There is funding. There is funding, matching funding through the State Historic Preservation Office that you could use to fund one of those. Of course, you still need to come up with the matching funds, but we could perhaps help you come up with some strategies to do that. But that's always our first recommendation, is have a circuit rider come out and then try to figure out how you can fund a condition assessment, because that will really give you the roadmap. All the questions that you asked, what needs to be done, what we need to do first. That document will answer all of those questions for you. So please reach out to us.
And okay. This is Stacy Vero. Did I speak with you about solar panels on the roof too, potentially?
No, that wasn't us.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
We haven't yet contacted Preservation Connecticut. We did write for a grant through Sacred Places
Mhm.
But, you know, I know there's a lot of competition and we did that. We got it in under the wire. So I don't think we're anticipating, you know, any assistance, at least this year, you know, through them. But again, we're very much in the needing to understand, you know, the scope of the work. And as Walter said, we want to make sure we do it right the first time. We don't want to, you know, get ahead of ourselves and start fixing something that, you know, something else is more important. So Mike, do we send an email to you, or how do we get started with the circuit writer?
Yeah, that's an email to me, to Stacy, and we'll find a time, work out a time with you to come out there.
Okay, all right. Yourself and Stacy.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm local to that area, so I'm happy to.
Oh, are you? Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And my colleague Jordan just put our email addresses in the chat if anyone wants to email us.
In our website at preservationct.org, there is a contact us button, and you can put a request in there as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Did anyone else have a question? I see a hand raised. Unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah,
There you are.
Ralph Anderson from the St. James Episcopal Church here in New London, about 2 blocks from the First Congregational Church that collapsed just a few months ago. So we're spending some time looking at our steeple that was built in 1850, about the same time as the First Congregational Church. And we've been talking to the State Historical Office and stuff like that, but and we've talked with an architect, and we've got some structural engineers taking a look at it. I almost think it'd be good, once we get that information in, to talk to one of you guys, and I mean guys in the sense of guys and gals, as to what makes sense for how we should proceed. You know, money is an issue, whether it's ours or the states or the federal government. So we want to make sure we spend it appropriately. And so who's the best, once we get some data in, who's the best person for us to talk to?
Yep, Preservation Connecticut.
So
Again, reaching out to us through our website, or reach Mike Farino directly. And
Okay.
he'll make a site visit and come out
Good.
and see what information you've gathered, what the building looks like, and what resources we can help you assemble to tackle the problem.
Oh, good. Thank you. Michael, I would expect that sometime end of the summer, I'll be contacting you to say, here's what we got. Would love someone to come and look at what we have received, and then take a little walk up into the steeple and say, oh no, they're totally wrong. Oh yeah, they're right on the mark. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah, anytime. We're happy
All
to
right.
come.
There was a question in the chat also for St. James. Walter, perhaps you can field this one. They were asking for some guidance on how you balance preservation and the demands for accessibility.
I'm going to let Jill take that.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Hi. We always look at our historic buildings that the reason that they're remaining so vital to the community is because they're accessible and usable by the community. And so accessibility is a key component, and there are many ways to approach it. And so it's really a matter of looking at the building and understanding its significance and its ability to be accessible at the same time. And for us, the balance always leans towards preserving historic fabric that is character defining of the building and makes the building an icon in the community, but also understanding that integration of accessibility through the historic fabric is doable and is appropriate. So it becomes a design approach of looking at appropriate ways. But we lean towards accessibility for every building, because if our buildings are not accessible, and that's not just wheelchair accessible, that's accessible for all disabilities, and it's also accessible for younger generations, you know, people that have children in strollers and need to enter the building and want to bring young children in. For the building to remain historically significant, it needs to remain vital. And so accessibility is key, and it's just a matter of doing it with an eye to understanding design in appropriate ways to make the building accessible. And when we talk about that as well, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single corner of the building needs to become accessible. The goal is to make the building as accessible as possible and to be able to hold programming that embraces the community and the community's needs and those with accessibility in areas that you are able to make accessible.
Great, thank you, Jill. There was also a question in the chat about identifying if your property is historic and how the process is for listing. Stacy, I was wondering if you could give us a quick synopsis of that process.
Sure. So the main thing you have to do is contact Marina Wisniewski, who is in charge of the state register, and Jenny Schofield, who is in charge of the National Register at the State Historic Preservation Office. But I can run through what the process entails. In each case, you'll have them kind of give them a basic understanding of what's happening with the building, have them come out to the site. Ideally, you would hire a consultant to complete the documents because they can be completed in-house if you have the capacity, but I'm assuming most of you don't have the capacity to complete state and national register nominations in-house. So they would hook you up with a list of consultants that you can choose from. There is funding available to pay for that too. So I think, you know, the process really begins by reaching out to them, and we can put their emails in the chat. But that's the best way to go about it. We certainly can come out and take a look and sort of report back to them as well, but a direct contact is always best.
Thanks, Stacy.
I was just going to add it in, as far as knowing if your building is already listed, the State Historic Preservation Office has recently put together a very nice mapping program called ConCris. I don't know, is it ConCris CT? Do you know, Stacy? I don't remember the.
I think it's just ConCris. Well, I'll look it up and put it in the chat as well. But
yeah, but you can look it up there, or you can feel free to reach out to us and we can check it for you.
Great.
I just want to add one thing with the register, that it's also important to take a look, not just if your building's individually listed, but if your building falls within a district and is listed as a contributing building in that district nomination. And so when you look up, don't just look up for the individual building, also look up for the neighborhood of your building.
That's a great point.
Any other questions?
So I have a quick question. So our church is kind of a unique one. It was an old farm that was built in the 50s that was converted to a church in the 70s. How would that fit into this kind of program, or does it?
Depending, yeah, so there's a couple qualifiers there, I guess, is the, you know, assuming that, let's just assume for the discussion that the house that the church is in is historic. it's still owned by a religious organization. So at least through our maintenance and repair program, it would be, if it's listed on the state or national register, it's owned by the religious organization, it would still be eligible for that program. So some examples might be, a converted theater. There are a couple of those that have turned into churches. Those are eligible. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be built as a religious structure to apply for these programs. But that's a great question. But again, reach out to us and we could talk more about it.
I'd love to. The sanctuary was the old barn that was converted, and it's really quite lovely, but it's a little bit unique compared to your typical place of worship. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful. It's 34 acres of land and a gorgeous site. The building, that all the rafters on the inside of the barn have been left in place to make it a really special facility. But we do have 9 buildings and we need to maintain those. And obviously it's become a bit of an issue. So I'd love to reach out to you and have some conversation.
Sounds
Great.
beautiful.
We'll look forward to it.
Well, we are past our time. If anyone had a burning question to ask before we close, this is your opportunity. Well, Walter and Jill and Mike, thank you so much. This was a very informative presentation. I'm sure we'll be having follow-up conversations with many of the folks, on the call today, and we look forward to seeing the progress of your condition assessment at St. Luke's in Bridgeport, and we'll be doing more programming and keeping you all informed of how that project is going in around Washington Park and Bridgeport. So you'll be hearing a lot about our work there. It's a very exciting project for us, and we're really pleased to have you as part of our team and going forward.
Well, we're cherished to be part of the team and to work with Preservation Connecticut, both in the field and at venues like this. Thank you so much for having us. We're honored.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Very, very well done. Thank you.